All right, so let's talk a little bit about Apocalypse Now. I honestly really like Apocalypse Now. I think it does have a lot of notable flaws, both from an analytical perspective and from a filmic perspective. I'm a fan of the Redux, but it is undeniably unbalanced and basically too long. You kind of have to already like the movie to want to watch or to find the Redux interesting, in my opinion and experience. Now, I like the Redux most of all. I think the scenes it includes are important, and I have not seen the new one, Apocalypse Now, the final cut that they put out not that long ago now, 2020 maybe, or maybe even later than that. I am told that it includes a lot of the stuff that I don't like, and I'll get into that later. Specifically, I'm told that it focuses a bunch on the very kind of brief love story between Willard and the widow at the French plantation. And I consider the rest of the French plantation scene to be really important and really significant. And so I've never watched the whole thing, but to the extent that it focuses on that element of the plantation scene, I already don't like it, because the stuff with the father and the family and the argument, and that's really what I like in that scene. And I think it's a worthy inclusion in the Redux. But apparently it's not the point of emphasis in Final Cut, so I'm not very sympathetic to it in general terms. Oh, look, kitty. Yeah, hey. Oh, goodness. She's a loud one. She's all good, but she likes to meow. Okay, just had a little interlude with my cat there. Wonderful creatures. I love cats. Um, Back into Apocalypse Now. So I'll talk mostly about the Redux, and in fact I'll include several scenes that are only in the Redux. And again, it's not a perfect movie by any means. Maybe later in this episode even I'll talk about a TV show called Community, and there's a gag in it where there's a parody episode of Hearts of Darkness, the kind of documentary that was made on the making of Apocalypse Now, primarily from footage captured by Francis Ford Coppola's wife, whose name escapes me at the moment. No, I can't remember. I'm not sure. But there's a gag in that episode where a character says, you ever seen Hearts of Darkness? Way better than Apocalypse Now. Which mostly isn't true. Like, Hearts of Darkness is a pretty good documentary, but like the idea that it's like this crazy, everyone was going mad, they're all doing, it's all crazy. It's not really that wild. It's kind of more sad than anything. Like, Duvall is clearly, or excuse me, Martin Sheen is clearly like really fucked up during it, and like it's kind of a bad situation on a variety of levels. It's a good documentary. If you like the movie, you should watch it, but it's not actually better than Apocalypse Now, although that's a good gag. Apocalypse Now, I mean, I'll front load with a couple of criticisms, right? Like all Vietnam movies made in America, it has nothing that interesting to say fundamentally about Vietnam specifically, or the Vietnam War all that specifically. It's much more about, generally speaking, the experience of Americans in Vietnam. You could make a very similar movie about the experience of Americans in Korea. The stuff about Kurtz, and he's out in the jungle with the natives. They literally call them natives. Like it's that is not actually so specific to Vietnam. And part of my thesis about Apocalypse Now is it is a general criticism and a generally perceptive piece about America and the attitudes of Americans. It's not really that specifically a Vietnam War movie. At one point, Lance, the young surfer character, is putting on camo makeup like compulsively. And I'm pretty sure it's Chief, the captain of the patrol boat, says to him, Lance, what are you doing? And Lance just goes, they're everywhere, Chief. I don't want them to see me. And there's not a single, quote-unquote, Viet Cong or North Vietnamese Army soldier in the entire movie. Other than maybe the one who's yelling, fuck you, GI! Before Roach, the guy at the outpost with the grenade launcher, kills him, presumably. Literally, there are no enemies for Lance to hide from in the actual movie. The people that attack him in the scene, relatively close to the scene where he's putting the camo on, are, as they say in that scene, as there's a line of dialogue, it's just toy arrows. They're just trying to scare us. Like, it's It's a movie not about Vietnam driving people crazy, but about Americans already kind of being crazy and their civilization on a certain level kind of having crazy premises that lead them to do these pretty awful things all over the world. I mean, Kurtz, he doesn't have a career arc that's specific to Vietnam, not even in a plot sense. It's not like he goes on some mission and the Viet Cong specifically shock him. No, the speech that he gives at the end is about trained cadres and the lack of judgment that they have. It's not really about Vietnam is so difficult, it's so crazy, it's so weird, we don't understand it. It's a movie where, in fact, like a lot of it is about America and Americans, even though, of course, it doesn't take place in America. And like most Vietnam movies from America, it has not a single Vietnamese character of any real note. I mean, really, unironically, the standout Vietnamese character in American filmmaking on Vietnam might be the girl from Rambo 2. Maybe, honestly. Like, there aren't that many other examples at all. Sorry, I'm just using my vaporizer in the off seconds here, and take me a little longer than I expected. Maybe I'll take a little break rather than do that. But anyways, the point of the movie is about America and the conditions of American civilization, leading inevitably to stuff like Vietnam, leading inevitably to stuff like Kurtz. In the same way that I think the more perceptive reading of Heart of Darkness is not, oh, wasn't the Belgian Congo crazy? Wasn't it so exploitative? Although it was, indeed, it was even sort of like notably evil and exploitative, even by the incredible standards of that period of African colonialism, the incredible standards of cruelty. It's more about capitalism and about the social system where Kurtz comes from and resides within. It's not really about the specificities of these conflicts in a deep way. It's about the general character of the people fighting them and the nation fighting them. And this is kind of revealed in and again, this is my reading. I mean, there's Coppola is from that generation where Vietnam, there were the radicals, the people who thought it was an imperialist war, the Black Panthers, like the people who really had a solid perspective on it. A lot of quote-unquote average Americans, by which you normally mean white when you say that sort of thing, but, quote-unquote mainstream American sort of thing, a lot of them were upset with Vietnam because, they might have gotten drafted. Like, they wanted to go to school. They didn't want to get drafted. They didn't want to go to Vietnam. They didn't want their friends to die there. There wasn't, in everyone's mind, this huge criticism, oh, it's an evil war. And a lot of the people on the anti-war side still went out of their way to be nice guys to soldiers and to talk nicely about the contributions of the army and the brave men and women and all this kind of stuff. The bit at the end of Rambo where he's talking about, oh, they're spitting on me, they're calling me baby killer, that mostly doesn't happen. People have done research on this. Like, there are very few, crimes reported or, people doing that are reported on ever. It's not a real trend. Like, honestly, think about a hippie. Is a hippie going to go to the airport and just kind of curse at a soldier coming back home from Vietnam and not thereafter lose all of their teeth in a mysterious accident, right? Like, that's literally just very unwise. You think you're going to go to the airport, how do you know the military planes are coming in that day, you don't know there's people returning on them. It isn't a real trend. I have no doubt it happened a certain number of times, but the idea that the hippies would call us baby killer, they love saying that. It wasn't this massive trend. It was a thing that maybe happened a certain number of times. It was not the overwhelming response. That is one of the more ridiculous things about really the first Rambo movie, and you can sort of see the genesis of the ridiculousness of the later movies. I'm sorry, I get it. He's a Korean War vet, the sheriff in the town, etc., etc. There's no reason for him to dislike Rambo so much. They don't really dwell on the homelessness or vagrancy aspects of it. They really do seem to talk like, we don't want guys like you around here. What, like guys who are obviously veterans? Like, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, that would not be the attitude of a fucking small town Colorado sheriff in that time period. It would be, who called you a baby killer? Yeah, I'll kill him. You know, like that would be. I'm sorry, I just don't buy the small town sheriff hating Rambo on sight unless they did more in that movie to make him like a bum, essentially. And the book, admittedly, does go a little further in that direction, where it's clear that he is kind of itinerant and he's just he doesn't really have anywhere to go or to be. And the confrontation between the two is a little bit different in the book. And so in general, I would say, don't get upset by the fact that Apocalypse Now doesn't have anything to say about the Vietnam War, about Vietnamese people. Or like 99% of Vietnam movies that have ever been made does not perceive the fact that Vietnam was an evil war and that American soldiers and servicemen and women in a variety of contexts did evil things regularly, willingly, and often with enthusiasm. You know, like this. One of the famous arguments in kind of Vietnam scholarship is like, to what extent is My Lai, the famous massacre of the village of My Lai, where there are reports of rape and torture and deliberate like cruelty, not just to people, but like in killing people, like people who were incinerated with flamethrowers just for no apparent reason. Now, again, these are from conflicting reports. Not everyone thinks that happened in My Lai. I think they did, but there are reasons some people object to that account. And there is a question in Vietnam scholarship writing on the war: how representative of that is My Lai? How representative of the general campaign, the general conduct of soldiers and Marines especially, is My Lai? And I think there's good reason to say it was pretty representative. Actually, that was a very like typical kind of operation, in my opinion, from what I've read on Vietnam. There are good books on this. There are critical books on this that are good as well, I think. But in general, I'll just move on a little bit and say we're just gonna take it for granted that, like, yeah, the Apocalypse Now does not have a good political line on the Vietnam War, where like it's deeply evil and colonialist, imperialist, not an exception, not an unusual thing for America or Americans. In fact, deeply part of their kind of civilizational DNA in a certain sense. Like what the Americans do in Vietnam is not exceptional. It is representative, and I think in its better moments the movie gets that. But you can't get too worked up over the fact that, I mean, yeah, it doesn't go through the whole movie pointing out that like these guys are invading like a people's land, people fighting against colonialism. The quote unquote Viet Cong, the National Liberation Front, are in fact the good guys. They do lots of nasty things. They absolutely do. So do the North Vietnamese army and their kind of administrators and that sort of thing. But you know what? The Americans do just as much bad, often more bad stuff, often more intensely in a shorter time period. You know, so I count it against them to a certain extent, and I'm not willing to countenance, you know, arguments about, well, I mean, it got off track, or it was supposed to be good. No, it was a bad endeavor from the start. It was part of Cold War strategy in a pretty evil way. Domino theory, if you look back on it, is really silly and insane. Like, it just doesn't make that much sense. It would have really been a more coherent policy for them to be like, just let Vietnam fall to the fucking liberation forces. Just make sure China and Russia can't align with them. That would have been the real strategic play in a certain sense. It's just, well, you're afraid of linking up, not really the domino stuff. You're afraid of a link up between revolutions in, say, you know, Vietnam, but also in other countries like, say, Indonesia, where there's a massive U.S. sponsored call of Chinese people who are thought to be communists, and also of actual communists. It's a genocide. Sometimes people say it's solely a political genocide. Now, if you look at it, there's a lot of stuff about like, oh, actually, all Chinese are communists. We're gonna have to kill them all. It's pretty brutal stuff. I'm just gonna take 1 second, and then we'll start going through Apocalypse Now a little bit more tangibly. Okay, so there's a reason that Apocalypse Now starts with Michael Sheen just already totally fucked up. Captain Willard is basically getting drunk and smashing his hotel room just out of kind of impotent frustration and rage. I mean, there's a variety of ways to interpret kind of the situation he's in specifically. I kind of think the reading is meant to be just that, like, oh, it's kind of like bureaucracy, you know. He doesn't have anything to do. He's been kind of left behind by the moment a little bit. And so, I mean, there is some comedy in the movie too, and there is also a repeat motif of Vietnamese characters in the scene, looking at what is happening, not saying anything. And that's actually one of the first things that happens is the housekeepers quote unquote outside of the in the hotel as the two officers come to retrieve Willard, and they give him the cold shower and just one more minute, and like that's a pretty funny scene. There's a bit with this later too where they do the USO show and you see Vietnamese people kind of clutching onto the fence, not saying anything but looking at what is happening. And there's one other instance, I can't remember where it is, but and then you go to a really great opening scene, early scene that is. The opening with the end and the Agent Orange and stuff is really cool, but the bit with Harrison Ford and the general and the CIA guy who just says with extreme prejudice, that's a really great setup, and the point there is kind of, the indulgence of the food, the degree to which they, despite being, in theory, kind of combat officers in an active war zone, are basically kicking back in an air-conditioned, little room with, a custom meal. And as they go on, it becomes clear that they're kind of as fucked up and even a little bit uncomprehending as Willard is. The general looks kind of apologetic as he's trying to explain Kurtz to Willard, and he kind of throws up his hands at one moment and in just kind of an expression of almost defeatedness. And Harrison Ford, the young officer, and yes, that is Harrison Ford, as soon as he starts actually explaining the mission to kill Kurtz, he go, you'll proceed up the up the Da Nang, and like he can't even really get the words out of himself. And as they say fairly shortly thereafter, even Willard notes explicitly, I'd killed lots of people before, but this time it was an American and an officer. And that sounds a little bit kind of chauvinist and like, oh, I killed lots of Viets, but now I gotta kill a white guy? Oh my goodness. No, it's because he's literally a fucking U.S. Army soldier. Your job as a U.S. Army soldier is not typically to kill other people from the Army. Like he's literally being told to do something that is kind of fundamentally paradoxical to the basic conception of what a U.S. military personnel, an active U.S. military personnel type of person is, right? You're going to go upriver and murder this guy who appears to have been doing good service and then kind of went off the rails, and as they say later, I mean, has he really gone off the rails, or is he kind of doing things the way that the military thinks it ought to be doing and says it ought to be doing, but is just incapable of doing? I mean, he writes these papers that essentially advocate for kind of his view of things, and the military rejects them. And as we see them going upriver, and in fact, the big spine of this movie is the little kind of episodes they have along the course of the river as they go up into Cambodia. And as we meet the crew, a couple notable facts, right? Fucking clean Lawrence Fishburne, who in fact did lie about his age in real life, he's 17. He's a 17-year-old in an active war zone. He didn't finish high school. That's absurd. That is such a good setup of just like, Clean was 17, he was some fucking horrible shithole. Wait, what? Why? So he just gets to die here instead? Awesome. Like, it's really, that crew is a great little mix of just like pathos and, to a certain extent, just like a little bit of kind of annoyance and like anger at these characters who are so complicit and so unwilling to say anything. One of the first things Chief says is, I pulled a couple special ops in there. Over the border in Cambodia is what he means, like in an illegal manner. He's already done that several times. He's already done several like openly illegal military operations. And so there is a feeling of, man, these crew and Willard and all of them, they're all, they they keep kind of talking about how uncomfortable they are in certain ways, or demonstrating that they're uncomfortable. I mean, especially Willard. But they don't actually seem that put out of sorts, and they keep acting like things are okay, and they're just doing what they got to do. Now, I mean, those can coexist. You do what you got to do, but sometimes that's horrible. But at the same time, there is a real ambivalence towards the crew and towards Willard that the film clearly feels. And as we get towards Air Mobile, the bit with I can't remember the actor, but I love the smell of napalm in the morning, Kilgore. There's a couple of interesting things here. I mean, that's one of the earliest scenes, and like every time I watch the movie, and I'm like, this is maybe a little too long. I watched just far enough to see the village raid and Ride of the Valkyries, because that is a really phenomenal looking scene, and it also has a great implication. Like, Willard introduces himself to Kilgore. I might be wrong on this. Maybe they say something about it in the meeting. I don't think we're actually ever told that he's like they're meant to like take him upriver. I think he's kind of trying to scam them and like pull a fast one. Like, oh yeah, they totally told me you knew about this. And he's like, well, I don't know about this. And he's like, oh well, they told me. And there's a real kind of deception going on from the first, where Kilgore is a maniac, but he's also, we can kind of indulge this guy with the surfing thing and maybe get a little bit of, quick travel out of it. And isn't that nice? And the degree to which, I said earlier, there's no VC in the movie. I guess that's sort of not true insofar as there are people who are shooting back and manning weapons in the village that the air cav raid. But at the same time, you literally don't even get a subplot, like an enemy officer or like a name. They could literally be a self-defense village militia rather than even like Liberation Army or North Vietnamese Army. They certainly are North Vietnamese forces. There's no specificity to the idea that, oh, those are definitely guerrillas and they're hiding out in that village. We don't really know that. I mean, the village doesn't seem like it has nothing going on. Like, as the helicopters come in, you see that female fighter with a weapon run into the kind of school grounds and kind of point the children and the teacher off in the direction like they're evacuating them. So it looks like there's someone in the village. It's not totally... it's not a fake target. And they mentioned people have been shot down in that vicinity before. But they're going there to surf, and they're very explicit about, we're going here to surf. What's the big deal? And this is a good scene, but it's the scene that a lot of people have seen. And I won't dwell too much on, I love the smell of napalm in the morning. The more revealing part of that bit is just the end of that scene, or after he's done the napalm monologue. He goes, someday this war's going to end. And he just kind of walks off silently. And it's clearly kind of a communication that, oh, this guy's in love with this. He's not... all that happy that the war is going to end one of these days, even though that's something that seems to unite a lot of the other characters. They want to get out of there. They don't want to be in Vietnam. Not so much Kilgore. So the best joke with Kilgore is they go on upriver, and there's a great little scene. I think it's just in Redux, where there are air cav helicopters flying over, playing a repeating message from Kilgore, where he's like, Lance, please bring my surfboard back. It was a nice board, and I liked it. And he's so openly kind of I have been wronged. Fate has dealt me a bad hand, and I demand redress. I am the officer here, and I will get satisfaction. I honestly, they should have done a take where he challenges Lance to a duel via the helicopter speaker or whatever, It's really funny. The bit with the tiger, I think that's kind of funny. I don't think it really has an incredible amount of meaning. It's kind of just oh, yeah, but you don't always get what you expect in fucking Vietnam. And it's also the thing of, they're just going to go into the jungle and find mangoes? The mangoes, they definitely grow here, on this river specifically. You're just going to find mangoes. There is a kind of perception of the distinctive American optimism of, oh, we'll make something of it. We'll go out west to Oregon and we'll figure something out, And, oh, it's a tiger. Actually, that doesn't always work out to your profit. It might work out to your death, in fact, although no one dies in that scene. He continues with the reading of Kurtz's kind of dossier, and he joins special forces. And as they mention, Willard did the course, and it nearly killed him when he was 19. I think he says. But Kurtz did it when he was twice that, which is really impressive, right? Like it's meant to be. This guy is not some maniac. He is a more than dedicated soldier. He's like Creed from Warhammer 40k. He's just like a cigar chomper. Like he's the classic soldier. He doesn't smoke in the movie. He doesn't have cigars, but like he's the image, the real manifestation of kind of soldierly pride and drive and dedication and willingness to go the extra mile to secure victory and all this kind of stuff. He's not just a crazy guy. And now we start getting into the more the tone gets increasingly darker, and literally the film also gets darker, and it starts mostly after this scene, but you can see it starting to creep in when they go to the USO show. And these were real things, and actually there were fucking tons of them. Like there would be USO shows sometimes for fairly small little groups, like a couple hundred soldiers or Marines or airmen or sailors or whatever. And, that's a big deal. You fly in some fucking celebrity. I mean, Bob Hope, that was a huge television program in that time period. He'd do a yearly, I think it was New Year's, maybe it was Christmas. He'd go to Vietnam and he'd do stand-up. And he was notorious for, like, he'd tell jokes about, like, don't pick up anything from the girls in Hanoi, And, he would tell jokes about Vietnam not being the way it was being perceived in America, which was as kind of a clean-cut war of, Time and Reader's Digest reporting on, the Navy corpsman who goes out of his way to administer medical care to the local Vietnamese just to, advance America's cause and our image and all this kind of stuff. That was the stuff that was being reported. What was really happening was, heroin overdoses and fragging officers and, revolutionary GIs printing, dissident newsletters for each other and all this kind of stuff. The USO show is a simple contrast in a certain sense between, Charlie don't get no USO. Charlie's only vacation is, a night's rest and some rice with maybe a little bit of rat meat. And I mean, it's getting a little bit over the top there. I mean, the National Liberation Front of the North Vietnamese, one of the things the Americans constantly struggled with was their ability to supply themselves pretty effectively. It's not like they were always eating, fucking lobster or whatever, or roast beef like they are in the air-conditioned offices like where Harrison Ford is staying. But they weren't just eating rice and rat meat. That's not totally fair. But it is a good contrast, and there's a lot of good contrast in that scene. The representation of the kind of entrepreneurial class in the movie is kind of interesting. You get the sense that this kind of showman who introduces the Playboy bunnies is a bit of a scammer. And when things start to get out of control, he pulls out a road flare, he fucking cranks it, he drops it, and he goes, "So long!" And he just runs into the copter. He doesn't even try and de-escalate things. He's just out of there immediately. And even the bit where they're dancing, the girls are dancing and the GIs are all cheering, and in the span of about 20 seconds, it goes from like, like one of the Playboy bunnies is like flirting with a GI in the audience, and they have a couple kind of flirty lines between the two of them. And then the crowd starts to go like, "Take it off, you fucking bitch!" And they're just yelling obscenities at this women who, I mean, clearly aren't exactly like, they're kind of trying to help out here. I get it that maybe this isn't what you wanted, but like, they're not fucking you over here, dude. And the soldiers go fucking crazy, and there's a bit where the helicopter's trying to pull up, and there are people dangling like the fucking Saigon, like the photos from the end of the war, like it's a moment of, this is how we're fighting this war, where, okay, you're a dedicated soldier, you gotta hump it all day, and then fucking stay on guard all night, watch out for mines, watch out for snipers, watch out for booby traps, watch out for people in the bushes, allegedly they're gonna call you a baby killer, all this kind of stuff. But at the same time, like, we're going to call a big pause and throw you a nice old show. Throw you a little show with some cute girls, And, isn't that kind of a ridiculous way for a war to be fought and for soldiers to live? Where it's just like, oh man, I can't wait till I get to the next USO show. Like, I want to see Bob Hope this time. That is kind of a stupid indictment of America on a certain sense of just like, man, you people love your army, your military, your sense of pride and power, and yet they can't go to another country and fight without a fucking caravan of McDonald's and Playboy bunnies and things to entertain them and remind them of home and all this kind of stuff. Home, of course, which is just as shitty as the situation you are in, as Willard reveals. And I mean, it's notable that the only thing that happens to Willard when he goes home is he gets divorced. There were lots of stories. Again, this appeared very regularly in stuff like Reader's Digest and Time, which were, you wouldn't say like hard reactionary, but were conservative and patriotic, especially in this time period. They do stories about like, poor GI comes home to discover that his wife is a lesbian. Uh-oh. Like, there'd be all sorts of stuff about the GI who was out defending the homeland and serving and dying and bleeding, and meanwhile his wife is at home, doing what, and like all this kind of dark stuff. And the implication being often that, well, he's over there fighting in Vietnam, and you're at home protesting Vietnam. You're one of them goddamn hippies, and there's some interest. I mentioned in a previous video, I'm reading Rick Perlstein's pieces on the 60s, Invisible Bridge, and Before the Storm, and Nixon Land, and Reagan Land. And there's lots and lots and lots of references to this kind of coverage with very good examples. I'd recommend you read those books. So you get the USO show. There's an interesting link to something later. But we'll see. We'll talk about that later on. We go upriver again. And one of the main thing here is Kurtz's letter to his son. And this kind of lays out what we're meant to think about Kurtz and what kind of Kurtz thinks about himself. One of the really relevant bits is where he says, I am beyond their timid, lying morality. He is the person who is facing the reality of, and I stress, this is my interpretation, not just Vietnam, but of combat and of the modern world. He's not just about, I've decided to really defeat the VC, I'm going in the woods, I'm getting the Montagnard. No, it's about he's reverted to the primal nature, which is the really appropriate thing. That is the dark truth of Apocalypse Now, is that becoming Kurtz, becoming the murderous savage, that is actually how power works and how conflict works and what happens and what is required of what Vietnam was meant to be. If you were ever going to beat the Viet Cong, it would require, not Kurtz and his 10 divisions, but 10 divisions of just Kurtz, each of them doing, stuff with the Montagnards and, horrible, flayed corpses and all this kind of stuff, as we see later on when we actually arrive there. So the follow-up to the USO scene, and this is, I think, longest in the Redux, and I think it's in the final cut, but I think it's cut down. The bit with the bunnies at the kind of rain-drenched outpost, where even the local soldiers and stuff are just kind of openly insubordinate to Willard as he tries to bargain for fuel and stuff, or bargain for supplies. I think he has fuel and he bargains for time with the bunnies with it. And, the question with this scene is, like, does Coppola get that this is kind of like a pretty dark series of, like, assault scenes? Like, the Playboy women are literally, so the one who's talking to Lance literally is saying, being Playmate of the Year is the loneliest experience of my life. And Lance is literally, like, unbuttoning her shirt and, like, looking down it while she's saying it. Like, clearly just, like, sorry, what were you saying? I'm interested in something else here, lady. Like, he's at all of them, they all, like, the obsession, Chef's obsession with the stinger at the end of the bit with them as he goes, if it hadn't been for Vietnam, I never would have met you, Miss December. And she just goes, I'm Miss May. Like, he doesn't even know who she is, and he's kind of obsessed with her, and, like, he's trying to get her to reenact the poses from Playboy and all this kind of stuff. And he's like, clearly they have no sense, and also this is a sense of, like, they're all fucking 17-year-old boys. They're all fucking morons. They genuinely sort of take kind of explicit advantage of the situation these women are put in, where it appears their helicopter has run out of fuel. they've basically not crashed exactly, but been forced to shelter at this base where obviously no one's going to help them. And Willard appears to basically offer them like a sex work exchange. And again, like, I'm not totally sold on this scene. The thing that undermines what I'm saying, especially with the Lance example, is at the end of the scene, she kind of connects with him and she gets really into it, and they start going at it and all this kind of stuff. And that kind of happens with Chef too. And you get the implication that maybe like there was supposed to be a connection and they're just being awkward. But I think the way to read this scene is like, no, this is what America and Vietnam is about. It's about taking advantage of people. It is about, okay, I get it that you're stranded, but I got something I want, and I can give you something you want. So, I mean, what's the big deal? Like, it's really kind of gruesome. I find the scene kind of hard to stomach sometimes. Especially, I mean, there's a bit where I think she's Tere is what they call her in the USO show. But the one who is talking to Lance explicitly says, like, they made me do things I didn't want to do. They made me do things in the photos I didn't want to do. They said it was what was expected of me. Like, at one point they say, she says, they made me put the ribbon between my legs. And I'm just like, oh, so that, like, literally the photos you took for Playboy were, like, partly coerced is the implication here, right? Like, it's a really gruesome scene, and I almost never gets all that much discussion in my experience of looking at Apocalypse Now. And I mean, again, it's kind of undercut by the kind of funny bit of Chef just going, cherry boy, you know, we can go down to New Orleans, I'll get you some pussy. You know, that's kind of funny. He just, that actor has great delivery. But it is a serious scene with a kind of serious implication, in my opinion, that I don't think it's dwelled on. And I think it's really interesting, although, yeah, kind of brutal in a certain sense. Then you get to the central turning point of the film's plot, which is you're kind of done the episodic stuff, with one exception. You get into the sampan scene where Chief is just pulling a totally unnecessary power play for virtually no reason, just kind of demanding that, like, they pull over and investigate this vessel, like, for no reason. And of course, you know, it goes terribly wrong, and they're all completely irresponsible fools. And, you know, the implication is kind of that Willard is the most responsible and perceptive of all of them for essentially mercy killing this person who, as they say, you know, you cut him in half with a machine gun and you give him a Band-Aid. This is one thing where I'll make a bit of a critical note. There is a kind of tradition among Americans, and especially among military inclined Americans and people, to go, oh, we could have won Vietnam. They wouldn't let us. They held us back. It's like, no, you were trying really hard. Like, there's no sense in which, oh, they didn't let us win. You were defeated. You lost. That's kind of a bullshit line. And I don't like the idea, which is maybe sort of nodded towards, that like, oh, you cut him in half, give him a Band-Aid. Well, shouldn't we just be cutting him in half? That's not exactly what the scene in particular means, but there is that tradition of reading the war that way, of like, we were at war, we should have just been brutal, we should have just been killing them. What's with all this fake charity bullshit? What's with all this hearts and minds? It's like, well, actually, that was like a very coherent strategy for like winning the war, and just trying to do like Devil's Guard shit would have been very stupid and counterproductive. It probably wouldn't have worked. And to the extent you see Kurtz kind of sort of doing that, where he's torturing people and he's taking trophies and he's displaying skulls and stuff like that, the film kind of makes the point that actually, yeah, that is the real nature of this thing, and to deny it is kind of an act of self-deception. So there is a partial conflict in here, in that the film isn't totally on one side or the other. But there are moments where it sort of nods towards this American tradition of going, oh, the stupid politicians, they held us back. We could have won Vietnam. We could have kicked their asses. What if we just bombed the dikes? What if we just bomb all of North Vietnam? We just destroy the whole country. And I was like, well, there were reasons you didn't do that. And to just say, oh, what if we just went all out? Well, how long could you have gone all out? How long could they have gone all out? Like, it just introduces as many questions as it attempts to answer. So there are some conflicting moments in there. Now, Dolung Bridge is an interesting scene. It's another kind of well-known scene. It's kind of I wonder if there's a bit in Come and See, a really great movie about the Nazi invasion of Russia, and in particular, it takes place in Belarus, where they were just, even by the standard of the Eastern Front campaign, a lot of horrible village massacres. And there's a bit where during the massacre, the Germans are basically playing carnival music, like they're literally playing music. And that happens here when you come up to Dolong. There's that really weird, like creaky music playing, and it is kind of like a demented, like festival sort of thing with the lights and the, at one point they pass by this little bunker and there's nothing but kind of like stern-looking black guys inside, just like, oh shit, are those like the kind of legendary like Vietnam Panthers who would like refuse to fight and would shoot their officers? Cool guys. The the bit with Roach is a good scene. It's a very good scene where they, what are you doing, soldier? I'm trying to kill this such and such. Can't you see that? Oh, I'm sorry, sir. I didn't see you were an officer. Like, and he's just so consumed with the act of trying to murder this guy, who it doesn't appear like it's working. The guy's covered by corpses or the bodies or whatever. Like, he's probably not going to get him just by shooting. They got to call Roach over. Roach, again, another kind of taciturn black guy who just kind of loads up his tiger-striped M79 and slowly aligns it and launches it, and it seems like he's killed this guy. So it's an interesting scene, although frankly I don't accord it that much significance other than like, yeah, Vietnam is chaos, it's chaotic, it's crazy. The gag where they sort of go, they knock it down every night and we put it back up just to tell the generals, just so the generals can say the road's open or whatever. Which again, that's not a totally unreasonable read of certain tactics certain strategies that are employed in Vietnam, but it is a little bit of a, I don't consider it all that major overall. You get into there's an odd subplot where they mention that there's another guy who was sent to do Willard's job. Colonel Colby, I think his name. Maybe he's not a colonel. Richard Colby, I think his name is. And he's a Green Beret. And at Dolung, they get a mail drop from a guy, and there's an update from the Harrison Ford people saying, Colby, we believe, is now operating under Colonel Kurtz, and you do indeed see him later on. And there is, in fact, a deleted scene that doesn't appear, as far as I know, in any of the renditions of the movie. You can find it on YouTube, where Colby kills the photojournalist, and then Willard kills Colby. And it's kind of just like, oh, we better take care of these characters. Like, the photojournalist just says he's leaving later on, and you never see him again, which is funny, but also not all that satisfying necessarily. So, it's not totally nonsensical, but Colby doesn't really end up being of all that much consequence. You get the scene where Clean is killed, which is pretty heartbreaking. Like, he's listening to a letter from his mother who's talking about, like, when you get home, we're going to try and get you a car, but don't tell your dad I told you. We're just trying to get the money up. I don't know for sure. It's honestly, like, a touching scene of, like, well, this guy's poor. Like, he had a family, and they're struggling emotionally and tangibly with him not being there. They wish he was there. And now he's never going to be there ever fucking again. In fact, he's not even going to go home as a body. Because they bury him at the French plantation. This is my favorite scene. This is the scene for me, and again, like, I'm a guy, my interest in history and in radical politics is in settler colonialism, so there's a reason I'm interested in the scene where the American occupying forces go and visit a bunch of settler colonials. It makes sense that I'd identify with this scene to a certain extent. And the French and the handful of kind of Vietnamese who are implied to kind of fight with them, fight on their side, I should say, like, just materialize out of the fog when they land in an attempt to find a place to bury Clean. And they strike up a little deal where they'll stay the night and bury Clean, and the French kind of won't mess with them or anything. And they have the extended scene at the dinner table with this French family, and Willard asking some kind of, like, not particularly graceful questions, but that do lead to quite interesting little responses and exchanges. amongst the family there. And there's the bit where uh, they say, this place is ours. It has been so for 70 years. It will be such until we are all dead, which doesn't seem like it will take that long. There's not all that many left. Like, the house is, like, ruined. The Willard is handed the flag as they drape the flag over the casket in military funerals, the American flag. And Chief hands it to him. We accept this flag on behalf of a grateful nation. And there's a bit where Chef is just like blown away by the fact that they have a Vietnamese chef in the nation of Vietnam. And he just goes, "Oh, well, there's a racial slur that I won't bother repeating." But it is a kind of amusing moment where he's just like, "Really? No way. He does French cooking? No way." They mention that they've killed some Americans. That in the defense of their property, they have at times fought the Americans. Briefly, it's implied, but yeah. And Kurtz, I keep saying that. Willard at one point goes, "How long can you possibly stay here?" Which is a pretty reasonable question in context. And the dad gets furious. "We stay here forever. This is our home, Captain." And they're never gonna leave. And he lists through a litany of just like French psychological like minefields of just like, Dien Bien Phu, we lose. Nigeria, we lose. Indochina, we lose. This piece of land, we do not lose. We keep it forever. Like he's obsessed with, I will die here. I don't care. This is my land. I know it's on the other side of the world from fucking France, which is where I'm obviously fucking from, but I'm gonna kill to defend this place. And if you want to fuck with me about it, I'll kill you too. And there's a great bit where he's on a long rant, and it is a very good little profile of kind of reactionary sentiment, even among French. Like, it's not all that on target as far as specifics, but it is a good look at like how reactionary kind of middle or upper class people would have thought about this stuff. There's a bit where he goes, the students, they stab us in the back. A soldier would pull the pin on the grenade. A piece of paper would fall out. Union of French women. We are for the Viets. Traitors! And he's furious. He's really, really upset at this, obviously. And at one point, his son kind of tries to go, they weren't communists, they were socialists, and they just go, communist, socialist, communist, socialist, communist, socialist, like for a minute, like a little bit, just yelling at each other, their own kind of competing narratives about why their nation is kind of falling apart and why they've failed in this military effort that they're explicitly proud of. Like the father, I don't even think it's it is the father. There's the father and the guy who is playing the accordion, who is stone fucking drunk, fall over drunk. And he just goes, "Do you know about Dien Bien Phu?" And the father starts going, starts talking about, the paratroopers, they would jump in from 90 meters, 70 meters. That's impossible. No army in the world can do that. And they would jump in just to die with their brothers. And, that is kind of actually true. Like, there were reports of paratroopers and other soldiers coming to Dien Bien Phu, even when they knew it was a failing endeavor, just to be with their comrades and to die with their comrades. And many of them indeed did. And it's a great scene. I don't totally dislike the little romance subplot. The idea of the widow and her husband, who Willard kind of clearly reminds her of. And, there are two of you. There is one that loves and one that kills. That makes a certain sort of sense, and that fits in the movie in some ways. But at the same time, it's lesser to the plantation scene, which I think is a real tour de force of just like, oh, these guys are just like us. They've gone insane with the acquisition and the defense of this thing that they kind of don't even need. And, that's the implication is that's what the Americans are doing. All right, man, this I've done Apocalypse Now for a long time here. I like this movie a lot. But they finally get to Kurtz's compound. And, you get the photojournalist who's great. And he just goes, that's the sample from New World Order, the song by Ministry. It's all right, it's all right. And that's the photojournalist yelling, it's all right, it's all been approved. And he's a good kind of rendition of certain elements. He kind of comes in and does the Hearts of Darkness stuff, where he talks about Kurtz as the kind of transcendent figure and the intellect and the kind of Byronic hero and all this kind of stuff, but also as crippled and as defeated and as laid low by disease and his own infirmity and doubt. And it's a really good ending, and I don't have that much to say insofar as when he gets to Kurtz, the point is the madness, the incoherence, the fact that it doesn't make sense. Kurtz isn't executing some master plan. He's just going, oh, I'm going to kill them all. Burn them all. Like, he's really just someone who has committed himself fully to the most basic logic of destruction and repression. And he's not someone who's enacting some far-eyed strategy that will win the war. He is kind of just a maniac at this point. He wasn't at the beginning. We were told very explicitly he's a high-performing, high-achieving Special Forces officer. He makes these decisions that aren't, ambitious or seeking glory. He's deciding for the benefit of his country and for himself and his own, will. A good man in certain ways. And by the time you get to him, he's reading poetry out loud and just kind of catatonically pawing through issues of Life, Life magazine. The point of it, again, I emphasize, is the incoherence. And I think a good scene for this is where the photojournalist is talking to Willard, and he has that totally nonsensical bit about, like, that's dialectical physics, man. Dialectical emotion. What is it? Dialectical something is you either love someone or you hate them. And Kurtz from across the room is just like grumbling. Ugh. And he picks up like a book and he goes, "You mutt!" And he hurls the book at the photojournalist. And the point is that neither of them can make any sense of this. They're just endlessly clawing at whatever kind of media or half-remembered, wisdom of the ages or whatever bullshit. Like, that is all they've got. And the best line in the whole movie, in my opinion, maybe, well, it is in my opinion, definitely, maybe the best line in the whole movie is where the photojournalist goes, "This is the way the fucking world ends, man. Look at this goddamn shit that we're in. Now with a bang, a whimper, and with a whimper, I am fucking splitting, Jack." And he just leaves. And again, there's a deleted scene where he's killed. But I like the implication. He literally just wanders into the fucking jungle and dies in the bombardment, or a snake bites him or whatever, Like, he's just... He has no answers. Kurtz has no answers. Willard has no answers. All he can do is just follow the mission and kill Kurtz, who kind of, as they say explicitly in the narration's not always a perfect element, but, he didn't want to die like some sad, broken down, wretched-ass renegade. He wanted to die standing up like a soldier, which, again, is a very American feeling of, well, if I'm going to die, it's going to be on my own terms, etc., etc. Even though, by that time, he's not standing up like a soldier. He doesn't even fight. Like, Willard walks in and hacks him to death. He's not fighting. He's not resisting. He's done, essentially. And there's a reason his last words are the horror, because that is all he can comprehend and ascertain anymore. He can't even really get himself or what to do or how to do things about it. He just gets that everywhere he turns, whether he acts this way, whether he acts within the contemporary army, whether he tries to go back to America as Willard had done, it will be frustration and defeat no matter what. And that is the kind of message of that movie, I think, in the end. There's a reason that Willard just leaves. The villagers all, the Montagnards, they all bow down to him. They've slaughtered the water buffalo, and then they let him go. He's literally armed. He throws down a weapon. And he takes Lance with him and leaves. Lance, kind of the sort of innocent of the movie. It's not a perfect movie. And I actually, unlike many people, I actually think the strongest scenes are sort of in the middle. I think the French plantation and the base with all the rain and the girls and the Dolung Bridge, I think those, and that particular bit of the upriver scenes, I think those are maybe the strongest elements. I'm not as huge a fan of the ending and the darkness and isn't it so mysterious. I think the point of that is it isn't that mysterious. Kurtz is a fat old man. He gets fucking killed by a younger man who then leaves. Like, that was his orders. He did it. And the only thing, missing is, Colby, that guy who was introduced as just kind of a red herring. He's dead too. So's the photojournalist. They're all dead. you know, and they bombard the village kind of for no reason. They don't need to do that. There's no one there. The Montaguards are going to fight the Americans now? What are they going to do? Like, it's a movie about the incoherence of the American condition, the incommensurability of expectation and reality as a powerful nation, as people told they are powerful and decisive and meaningful and real, who nonetheless have to confront, you know, contexts and challenges that push them to their limit and beyond it and defeat them. And all of their history as Americans, their pride, their valor, that cannot avail them. That is, in fact, only sinking them deeper into the morass, in a certain sense. So, that's a long talk about Apocalypse Now. Who knows if anyone will ever watch any of this stuff. Especially this, which is just 40 minutes of me talking about Apocalypse Now and 20 minutes about mostly fairly obscure music that not a lot of people listen to. So, you know, I hope you enjoyed this. This has been a little bit of a simpler episode. I had some heavy stuff at work this week. I did some overtime, and so I just didn't have all the time I normally have. Such that I'm probably going to do the video with some stuff on Sakai and Clausewitz and a couple other leftist thinkers. Number 5 will be the one after this, and then we'll see where we're at after that as far as what I want to make. But we'll get back on the directly political track fairly soon. But I hope you've enjoyed this. I hope you found it interesting. I hope if you haven't seen it before, maybe you'll go and watch Apocalypse Now, or maybe you've already done that and you skipped the spoilers in this or whatever. I haven't really marked it for spoilers. Obviously, there's spoilers throughout the whole thing, but you know, whatever. Anyways, all the best to you. Have a great day, and I'll see you again soon. Alright, folks, I'm editing this segment in after the fact, just provide some clarity. Over the month of December, not that there are a lot of people following this channel by any means, but over the month of December I'm trying to do a bunch of writing for another project I'm part of, and so I'm only going to end up posting probably 2 completed videos over the course of the month. This one, which is going up December 2nd or 3rd or something, 3rd I think. And then I'll have one more, Cryptid number 5, that is an elaboration upon the concepts, the original concepts I talk about in Cryptid number 3, ownership, dictatorship, the Atlantic imperialist bloc, and settler fascism. That'll probably be 2 weeks away from now, rather than next Sunday. And then once we get into January, then I'll start recording regularly again. I'm going to try and produce about 100 pages of writing over the next couple of weeks, and so I'm going to be fairly busy doing that. I am trying to improve my editing and that sort of thing. I'm doing more with editing as far as making the textual comments a little bit more relevant and appropriate and better timed, and sometimes putting them in as background gags so they're not just kind of simple clarifications. Admittedly, I mean, one of my influences in this area is like old zero punctuation videos, which I used to find very funny. Admittedly, they've grown a little bit long in the tooth nowadays, but I remember watching those back in the day, like when he was just releasing like the BioShock review and like the review of like the demo game Heavenly Sword and stuff like that, and like other games. So that's part of my influence, and maybe we'll see a little bit more of an art style evolve over time. I don't really know how to do art, but I'd like to try and find out and maybe do something. Make up a little like stick figure or character that I can use to do, clarifications or examples or just gags or whatever. So we'll see. Short answer is this will be the last video for 2 weeks. There'll be another video, and then you'll have to wait until January for more. Once again, all the best. Have a great day.